Now, in, of course, a weekly opinion piece, Alan Emerson in Farmers Weekly has said that, of course, he doesn't have a problem with the rationale behind planting trees. You know, we plant trees and we feel good about it. They absorb carbon dioxide and save the planet. However, many people across New Zealand in the rural communities do have an issue with it. And of course, I do have to point out that Alan Emerson is referring to the policy announcement from Labour last week. And of course, Forestry spokesman Stuart Nash, who has decided to make a few tweaks to the RMA to make things sound a lot better. We won't put trees on the flats. Tick. Done. One farmer got in the comments to me and said, it's not really that straightforward, Sarah, and would love to join us to share his opinion. Guy, thank you for joining us. Of course, another one mid-school holidays. Really appreciate it. Where are you?
Yep. We just got to Turangi for a holiday, which we never seem to get around to doing. So, yep, up here with the wife and kids. So we'll go and get some mountain biking, and I think we're going whitewater rafting and a few other bits and pieces. So
cool. A few throwing a fly rod around.
Yeah, no, we'll hopefully get to do a bit of that too. Yeah. So.
Oh, good on you.
Yep.
Hey Guy, can you just explain to our audience a bit of background and your experience with forestry on farm?
Yeah, I suppose probably got a fair bit actually. My grandfather planted a lot of trees in the late 60s, early 70s. So he was a bit of a visionary, I suppose. There was a sort of rough block out the back of the farm that they decided to plant. So I think I planted my first tree when I was 10. My father and I, in the 80s, started planting trees. I spent most of my teenage years clambering around in them, cutting branches off. Did a forestry course in 94 at Taratahi, and that was going to be me for a bit there. I was going to join a forestry gang in Taupo, and then I decided I'd go to Smedley Station and learn farming. And on steep hill country, which, you know, a lot of that farm was probably in this classing things up around the high 4s to 5, and found that it was pretty productive.
Okay,
and
so
my whole idea of it was quite wrong.
For our audience as well, could we work through this classing system? Because I'm familiar with it from a profit benchmarking perspective Beef and Lamb used to use back in the day, so you could understand 1 being on the flats through to 5 being extremely steep.
Yeah.
How is it being relevant now to what Stuart Nash has announced?
Yeah, I suppose, class 1's going to be your cropping, your dairy farming and fattening of cattle and lambs. Class 2's probably more the straight fattening side of it, but dairy still need some hill country to dry their cows off onto and grow out their heifers. Class 3 is probably your standard sheep and beef farm that breeds and finishes all their livestock. They probably don't have a huge requirement for the store market. They're a full system in their own self. And then you got class 4 and 5. Mainly class 4's your big sheep and beef breeding operations that potentially are selling a lot of their stock in store to the class 2 and 1 grade farms. And then a lot of those class 4 farms will have a component of class 5, I'd imagine. Yeah, so that probably rounds it off.
Yeah, so what's wrong with planting out some of these, non-productive gullies on class 4 and 5, in your opinion?
Yeah, nothing wrong with that. And like I say, my family's been doing it for a long time. The issue is that they sort of group that class 4 and 5 and go, well, that was unproductive land. Often these class 4 farms will have, like I say, these areas of class 5. Some areas need to be planted, absolutely, don't disagree at all. But I think we need to be careful because when you get dry years in the middle of winter, those steeper areas usually got a bit of tag on them, and they can keep your system going. If you keep planting those off, you sort of leave yourself a bit vulnerable to an extent.
And of course, in your role as a fertiliser consultant, but also in experience with sheep and beef farming over the years, what have you seen as well? I mean, we've all seen that footage, Henry up there on News Hub in Gizzy in the Tolaga Bay slash, and the vulnerability of the soil structure over years and years in terms of how we're blanket planting. What's your experience with that, and what would you like to see change?
Well, I mean, I started shepherding in the mid to late 90s when there was a lot of planting going on. And my first job, actually, I was in the first year at it, and I heard a whisper that it was getting sold to Forestry, and I sort of jumped ship before it started sinking. Luckily enough, it actually went, a third remained in farmland and still farmed really well today. A third got planted, and there was a lot of good country in there too. And then there's a third run as a hunting park. So, I got a pretty rude awakening sort of scenario happening right off the bat. And now I drive around covering a lot of the East Coast, Ruatoria, right down through the Wairarapa. And the same thing's happening again that what happened in the 90s. To address the question, I suppose, is, I mean, it's a long way back, isn't it? When you plant them in pine trees, to try and reclaim that land is a long way back.
In terms of soil erosion and what it's doing as well, and what you've seen over the years, what is happening in that soil? Obviously the planting side of it, but eventually getting cut down and returning to pasture or not being replanted.
Yeah, I mean, the root structure of those pine trees, obviously the big tap roots, when they die, they leave big holes. But it's actually when the tree gets cut off, it's all the fine roots that are quite hard to see that actually cling all the soil together. And as soon as that tree's cut, all those small root hairs die straight away. And that's where you leave yourself vulnerable. That soil structure is just not there. And we get floods like, I suppose it was just over 2 years ago now in Tolaga Bay, when where farms like Manawatu and through that area got absolutely demolished right through the roading with slash, and then it just keeps washing in on the bay every time you get an easterly. So it's pretty devastating. The consequences are huge. Like plant trees and stop erosion. It doesn't quite work like that. You basically get, after 25 to 30 years, you get a massive erosion that probably is worse than what it would have happened over that time in sheep and beef.
And I know that you're a passionate dog trialist, Guy. Rural communities have changed, particularly in Central Otago, around vineyards expansion over farmland, let alone up the East Coast where all big sheep and beef properties and the rural communities and that changing. What have you seen, and are you seeing that rapidly change again like it did in the 90s?
Yeah, I think the first time I went to Blenheim for New Zealand Champs, where we had the dog trial, there was plenty of room. And when we went back 2 years ago, everything had changed. All the flat land that where we used to park cars, all the runs go, was all in vineyards. So, it was quite shocking.
And of course up the East Coast as well, with trees taking over communities up there.
Yeah, I always remember first going to Rukaturi dog trial and seeing Rukaturi Station planted in, and that they've just started harvesting that now, which made me feel quite old. Everything just keeps changing. There's less guys, less rural communities. I was up in Tokomari Bay last spring, and it was pretty shocking, really. Just there's nothing getting painted. There's no money getting put into those little communities. It's just slowly dying. It's pretty hard to watch.
Yeah. So what about, just to close, around the misconception that there's nothing good on those backcountry blocks, let alone there's still a lot of young fellas that would love to have a go and get stuck in to those properties, especially when forestry is being subsidised for the people that want to sell out to that, when there is young fellas that and lasses that would love to jump into that.
Yeah, I mean, like no one's, and I think I speak for all of the 50 Shades of Green, that no one wants to, pick on anyone that's sold their farm to forestry. It's their choice, and you can't knock them for taking the money. But every time a farm goes into forestry, that's one less chance for young guys to get in and get a go at farming. So. And you see it around Pongaroa, especially like with it's not just the trees, it's the bee farming and everything. There's been families that have been struggling on farms for years. You can't blame them for selling off, but it's always pretty hard to see it happen.
Hey, Guy, just on that, can you tell us about your mate that's completely bought it and completely shut off country to bees and how profitable that is?
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly not trying to use any names, farm names or people's names through this, but
no, it's just as an example of that marginal land.
Yeah, he was I think he left school pretty early and he had a full-time job working on a farm, and then he was leasing and basically working 7 days a week. And his last lease he just finished up, and he bought a block way at the back of Pongaroa. And basically after 6 or 7 months, a whole lot of that got sold to bees, which was just straight scrub. It was in the middle of the farm, solid wall-to-wall scrub. So exactly what the bee guys wanted. And he's just got bigger and bigger off the back of that, and bought another couple of, I think he's bought three and a half other farms. One he saved a bit off a forestry venture, which was awesome. So yeah, there's those opportunities. He was so lucky to get in at the time he did. Like if he was doing it now, he wouldn't have stood a chance, which is sad. And that's the Kiwi dream, to be able to go from or become a self-made man through hard work. Those opportunities are just going to get fewer and fewer.
Yeah, absolutely. When the opportunity is to lock up land for bees and trees, and of course the romance of and very bloody hard work of steep hill country sheep and beef farming disappears. Thank you so much, Guy, for joining us on Serious Country and sharing your opinions. And of course, I'm sure they represent many, many of our listeners and audience as well. So thank you very much for taking the time to join us on your school holidays as well. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Cool. That's Guy Peacock, Manawatu sheep farmer, of course, fertiliser consultant, and very concerned rural New Zealander about that this Labour pivot on the RMA for blanket pine forestry plantations does not go far enough.
This is Sarah's Country.